Hi YouTube, it's Kathy, and this is my August 2025 reading wrap-up. If you're not already aware, I do weekly entertainment wrap-ups of everything I read, watch, and listen to, but today we're just talking about the books. I'm going to start with my nerdy hardcore stats and charts and then get into what I read. Also, I put chapter markers in all of my videos, so if you need to skip over anything, although I don't really do spoilers, or if you need to go back to anything because you're like, wait, what is that book called again? All of that is down below. While you're checking that out in the description, make sure that you're subscribed because YouTube really loves to unsubscribe people, and maybe hit that bell notification just to see if it does anything. As a reminder, I'll be updating my bingo board from hell as well as the prompts for Read Queer all year at the end of the video, so stay tuned for that. I feel like I say this every time I make a monthly video, but I'm going to try to make this pretty short and sweet because I've got other things to do. Also, I usually try to film these videos when nobody else is in the house because obviously there's sounds created by other people, and that's just not practical for this month because I try to get these out as close to the beginning of the month as possible, and the rest of my week I am away from my house. So we're just going to make do. We're not going to care that somebody else is doing laundry and that they're going to be doing chores around the house. We're just going to talk about the books and have a good time. In August, I read 19 books for a total of 5,045 pages. That takes into account converting audiobook minutes to pages, so 1,800 of those pages were actually about 60 hours of audio. The age breakdown for these books was 15 adult books, 2 YA books, and 2 middle grade books. I read 12 novels, 4 anthologies, and 3 graphic novels. This month, the biggest chunk of what I read was contemporary and nonfiction, followed by romance, historical fiction, poetry, fantasy, and spec fic. If you adjust by page count, romance is beefier, and poetry, nonfiction, and fantasy are much smaller. Most of these were from the library, but I did read a couple that I already owned, one from NetGalley and one from an indie bookstore. I read 9 paperbacks, 6 audiobooks, 3 hardcovers, and 1 ebook. The biggest chunk of my books were in the 300 to 399 page range, and the majority were published this last decade, although I had a few older titles as well. When it comes to genders of authors, there was a decent mix, which meant a great mix when it came to genders of protagonists. In terms of settings, just under half were set in the US, but I also had books set in Canada, the UK, Trinidad and Tobago, Japan, Ireland, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, India, Uruguay, and Iran, which I think might make this my biggest month for the greatest amount of random countries. In terms of diversity of subject matter, the biggest chunk were intersectional and queer, as well as one of them dealt with chronic illness, and a couple had no discernible diversity. In terms of star ratings, this month I had 1 3-star read, 4 3.5-star reads, 7 4-star reads, 5 4.5-star reads, and 2 5-star reads. Let's start with the lowest rated read and work our way up to the highest, shall we? My 3 stars is only a 3-star because it's a poetry collection, and usually I do not remember those by the end of the month whatsoever, and that's West of West Indian. This is written by a Caribbean author talking about the intersex of being black and queer and Indo-Caribbean and all of those things, both in the Caribbean as well as being in Canada, because I believe the author lives here now. By here I mean Toronto, which feels like a whole different country away, honestly. Like I said, I'm not a big poetry person, so poetry doesn't stick with me, but I do remember where I was while I was reading this, and I do remember enjoying it. I just don't really have much to say besides I like seeing this type of representation. On to my 3.5-star reads, the first one being Gender is Really Strange. This is a very, very short graphic novel sort of format. It's got a lot of information in it, but it's also full of illustrations, and I think it was only about 32 pages long, so it is a very short and sweet primer on a bunch of different things having to do with gender and just how strange it really is. Side note and tangent to do with gender, I watched a video the other day about how there's 76 known different variations of intersex just out there, but we don't test for any of them, which is ridiculous. So there's a lot more out there to know about sex and gender and how those things intersect for some people and don't for others. Next we have The Outsiders. This is the book that I read that was from the 60s, and I'm glad I finally got around to this because it's been one of those books that I've seen people be like, oh, I really loved this as a kid. This was the first ever YA novel, and I'm like, was it really? I don't know. I would have to look it up. I can tell you that the author wrote this while she was in her teens, which was interesting, and I can tell you I really enjoyed the audiobook experience of it. Our main character in this one is Ponyboy Curtis. He lives kind of an interesting lifestyle because he doesn't have parents anymore, but one of his older brothers is his guardian, and him and his group of friends are kind of the greasers, and then there's other people in town called the Socias or the Socials, and they're the more upper class people in town, and there's a big rivalry. There's also other people, they also have rivalries, but this book really comes down to social fighting, what happens if people take things a little bit too far, and sometimes people just have to go on the run from the law. I can see why this is a classic, I can see why people really enjoyed this, and I'm glad I finally got around to it. The next book is The Mermaid of Black Conch. Now, I'm going to be honest, for the first little bit of this was quite a slog. There was like an entire chapter of just trying to catch this mermaid, but in the most repetitive way possible, where it's like, yes, you can convey that this took several hours without us having to beat by beat go through every one of those hours. This one was told in a couple of different point of views, although this takes place, I believe it was the 70s, if I'm remembering, 60s, 70s, 80s, somewhere in there. There's diary entries from 2015 about this guy who was a part of this situation, so we're seeing it from his perspective. We're also just kind of seeing it sort of from the mermaid's perspective, but it's more like a third-person omniscient, if I'm remembering correctly, that kind of perspective. And then we're seeing kind of poetry at certain points, which I believe is directly the mermaid's experience, if I'm remembering correctly. I read this at the beginning of the month. This ended up being super interesting, but it had way more talk of different people's appendages and what they wanted to do to people with them, and brutality and violence. That just made me going, why are men? Why? So the story, once it really got going and it got past those parts, I enjoyed, but it was a really difficult slog to get through the beginning for me personally. One of the graphic novels I read this month was Persepolis, which I've been meaning to get to for years, probably about 20 years, because it came out 22 years ago. This is a graphic memoir about this woman when she was a child growing up in Iran in the 70s and 80s, around the time of the revolution that was going on. So she went from a carefree child who could wear whatever she wanted, do whatever she wanted, her family owned a Cadillac and those types of things, to the revolution where suddenly she had to wear a veil and people were really scared about what was going to be happening because things that were too decadent were taken out of society, like universities. So there go her plans of becoming a doctor one day. I find it endlessly interesting to see the childhoods of other people and how vastly different they can be from my own, and that's one of the things I found most interesting about reading this. One of my 4-star reads, and we're starting with a middle grade book called Asking for a Friend. This is about a non-binary main character who has just recently moved schools because there was some bullying at the last school, let's be honest. And their mom really wants them to make friends, so every day when they come home from school they're talking about these different classmates as though they're actually friends with them. But the thing is, they haven't actually interacted with any of these people, so all the things they're talking about to do with these classmates did happen, but it's not like they were actually having conversations and they learned these things. They just kind of overheard them. Suddenly their mom wants to throw them a birthday party and is like, you need to invite all of these people, and they're like, oh no, like now I have to actually befriend these people or my mom is going to be really disappointed in me. In addition to this, a bunch of the people that they've been interested in interacting with but just haven't actually done it end up being queer, so there ends up being a queer friendship element to this that I really enjoyed. This was really sweet but also painful at moments. There's definitely anxiety representation in this one, and it was just a delight. This is the second book I've read by this author this year, and I think I'm going to have to read more. My next 4-star book is also a middle grade book, and that's called Puzzleheart. This is also about a non-binary character, and they've realized that their dad is struggling, and they've figured that maybe if they can bring their dad to visit their grandmother, who they've never actually met, their grandmother might be able to help out their dad. It turns out that their grandmother lives in this super interesting place that was supposed to be this mystery-themed bed and breakfast because it has all of these different cool puzzles and stuff in it and very cool different themed rooms. Unfortunately, her husband died before they opened it and she never actually ended up opening it. So they arrive in a snowstorm to this house, and then we as the reader find out this house kind of has a soul and wants certain things for the occupants of the house. Suddenly, Perigi, our main character, is faced with solving these different puzzles in order to get people to get along, talk to each other, and sort out the problems in their lives. This, again, was absolutely delightful, which is pretty much what I say for every queer middle grade I ever read. Next, we have a romance called Love and Other Conspiracies. This is about a video producer who needs a new project because otherwise she's going to be let go from her job, which really sucks because she was supposed to be producing this different web series, but her boyfriend decided that somebody else should produce it, so they're no longer seeing each other. He is also just a terrible human being, and we're very happy she got out of that situation. So she has to put together a pitch for a show, and she's doing some late night research. There's been some drinking involved, and she stumbles on this conspiracy theory show in the middle of the night when there's one guest star on it that she's like, that guy, he could do really, really well on our platform. So she tracks him down. She doesn't believe in any of the things he talks about, but she's very upfront about that, and he's interested in making it into a web series, so why not? And then of course, while they're looking for cryptids, sparks fly. This was a good time, but it also had a lot to do with grief and mental health and the pains of previous relationships, so know that going into into it, check trigger warnings if you need to. I enjoyed my time with it. Next we have Blue-Skinned Gods. This one primarily takes place in India, and our main character as we meet him is 9, just about to turn 10, and he's been told his whole life that he is the reincarnation of one of the Indian gods. Essentially in this next year he's going to be given 3 different trials, and if he passes them it just proves that he is the god. We as the reader come to find out pretty quickly that his parents have definitely been lying to him. Like, it doesn't seem like he's actually a god, but when you've grown up with parents who are constantly just telling you this, you have to believe them until something comes along to dislodge that idea in your head. The weirdest thing about this book for me is when we got to the end, it just kind of ended out of nowhere after this very dramatic thing, and I wasn't expecting it. So if you've read this book, please let me know what you thought about the ending of it down in the comments below. I would recommend this one, and the audiobook was a wonderful listening experience. Next we have The Poisoner's Ring, which is the follow-up to A Rip Through Time and is the second in the Rip Through Time series by Kelley Armstrong. This one takes place in Edinburgh, and the whole thing about this story is in the first book we met our main character, and she somehow got sucked back in time and into the body of a completely different person. And in Canada she works for the RCMP, so she's a cop. But now she's about 100 years previously in a teenager's body, and she's trying to help solve different crimes using these methods that she knows from the future that don't exist in the past. Since I don't want to really spoil much from the first book, I'll tell you that this second book primarily has to do with what they call a poisoner's ring, which it seems like there's somebody that has a certain type of poison that they can use to, you know, murder people. But it seems that different people throughout the town are going to this same source for their poison, potentially. So they're trying to figure out who that source is and if all of these suspicious deaths are actually linked or not. One thing you might know about me is Edinburgh is my favorite place in the world, so I love that this takes place there, and I'm very interested to continue this series because I know there's already more books out in this series and I'm just lagging behind because, as we know, I don't finish series in a timely manner unless they happen to all be available to me and I just happen to go, yeah, I'm gonna read all of those right now. Speaking of a series I'm reading sort of in a more timely manner, although I kind of messed it up, we have For Her Consideration. This is the first in the Out in Hollywood series, and I actually read the third in this series because they're companion novels and I feel fine about doing that, back in June for the Queer Lit Readathon. This one became available and I was like, sure, let's go into this and figure out what was going on with that one couple I kind of saw in the background of the book that I've already read. The main character in this one is Nina. She has a very niche and interesting job in Hollywood, and that's that she writes emails for famous people in their tones of voice, so that the famous people don't have to remember to do the things like that. So if you get invited to a party and you have to like remember to email that person and be like, hey, I thought this was great, or thanks for inviting me, that type of thing, she writes those for a handful of very famous people. She does this for an agency. She's allowed to do this remotely, and one day her boss is like, hey, I need you to come into the office because one of the people on our list is not happy with her emails. And she's just so upset. She's like, oh no, I've messed it up. I've messed it up for this person who I actually really admire because she's a queer woman in Hollywood, and that's just amazing to me. And I'm a really big fan of her work, so if she's unhappy with me, that's a really bad thing. So she gets there, and it turns out that Ari is not super upset, but just feels like she wasn't really nailing her voice, so she's like, we should spend some time together. You'll be able to understand how I would actually answer emails better in the future. And from there, yes, indeed, some sparks fly, but there's definitely complications. I very much enjoyed this, and now I'm just trying to figure out who the couple in the second book must be, and I'm going to have to read that eventually. The last book on my 4-star list is Dark Archives. This one has a very long subtitle, which I didn't bother writing down, but it basically has to do with the history and science of anthropodermic bibliophagy, which, if you don't speak a lot of Latin, I'm not saying I do, although I speak enough that I can get some parts of these words, that basically boils down, which is probably the grossest way I could have said it, to books bound in human skin. I was super interested in reading this because I've seen a book that I believe was bound in human skin. I was told at the time it was bound in human skin, which is why I went to go track it down in this very tiny little museum off the Royal Mile, while I was in Edinburgh, of course. But it turns out there's a huge history of different books that are rumored to be in human skin, and some of them have been disproven, some of them have been proven, because there's actually a test for that. If you just take a very small amount of the leather, you can figure out whether or not it's human skin or not. This went through different reasons and methodology to do with this practice, and I found it endlessly fascinating. One of my 4.5-star reads, the first one being Witchy Stitching. This one is a cross-stitch book, so mostly I was looking at all of the different things that I'm going to have to make at some point, but it also has this introduction section about what is cross-stitch, how do you cross-stitch, how this person got their inspiration for the type of cross-stitching they were doing, and all of the different things they created for other people to make, and it was just delightful. If you cross-stitch and you're excited for Triple October, I highly recommend picking this one up or getting it from your library. There's one in here that I am definitely going to have to make make, but it's going to take me a very long time. And it's this beautiful different shades of red castle Bran, which was one of the inspirations for Dracula, which is a castle that I've actually been to in Romania. So as soon as I saw that, I was like, well, I have to make that now. And by now, I mean as soon as I get around to it. Next, we have Boys Run the Riot Volume 4. This is the final volume in this manga series, and I just really enjoyed it. I really loved getting to know these boys and what they were doing with their fashion brand and all of these things. It's a delightful series. You should read it. Next we have Heartstrings, which is the follow-up to Morbidly Yours. This is another romance series that is companion series, so you don't really need to read the first book to enjoy this book, but you'll have more background knowledge. This one has to do with a couple that we met in the last book, and they actually kind of met in the last book and started seeing each other. However, by the time you get to this book, they broke up about 2 years ago because he was going to go off and have his musician's career, and he had to move to London to do that, and she didn't want to do a long-distance thing because of things to do with her past. Now she's going to be the maid of honor, and he's going to be the best man at their mutual best friend's wedding, so they kind of have to see each other again. And then of course they see each other in person for the first time in ages and go, ah, that's really unfortunate that you're still so pretty. What I like about the romance I've been reading recently is it seems like, yes, it's light and fluffy in its romance, but it also talks about these deeper emotions like grief. Particularly the main character in this one used to have cancer, and her mom is very overprotective and overzealous because of that, and there's certain aspects about her own health that she just has to really worry about, and her mom is overstepping on things. So all of these factors play into this relationship, and it's just great to see these multifaceted characters. Next we have The Gungle. This is another one that's absolutely delightful and funny and brilliant, but also has to do with some really hard subject matter because there are people grieving so hard in this book. Our main character is Patrick. He is an actor. He used to be on a TV show that was basically like Friends. He was one of the main cast, but that ended about 4 years ago, and he moved out to Palm Springs, and he's been kind of cloistering himself there ever since. He doesn't really get out of the house. His best friend in the entire world recently died, and his best friend was also his brother's wife because she ended up marrying his brother, and they had 2 kids together. So obviously those kids and his brother are grieving that, and he didn't get to say goodbye because he didn't want to take any time away for them to be with her. When he goes to the funeral, he finds out that his brother actually needs him to take the kids for 90 days because he needs to check himself into rehab because he developed a dependency while his wife was sick. At first he's like, no, can't do this, not gonna be able to do this, but he ends up being like, you know what, I think I might be the exact right person for this situation. Like I said, this one was both heartbreaking and hilarious at the same time, and just the ability to be able to pull off those 2 things I am so in awe of. Also, the audiobook is read by the author, which is something I'm always very excited about, even if I've never heard of the author before. Finally, before we get to the 5 stars, we have Cantoras. This takes place in the 70s and 80s in Uruguay, and primarily focuses around 5 different lesbian women who all decide that one day they're going to go on this beach vacation to get away from their major city where the eyes of the dictatorship are constantly on you, and they just want a place where they can be themselves. While they're on this beach vacation in a very small secluded place, they decide they don't really ever want to leave, although they do have to go back to their lives at some point, but they keep coming back to this place. This is about friendships and relationships, makeups and breakups, and these different dynamics of these different people through many, many years, and I cannot do it justice. Honestly, this was just so beautifully written. I wanted to know exactly what was going to happen to all of these characters, and it's written in such a flowing way where suddenly you're in the head of a different character, and now you're getting some of their backstory, and then you're going back to what's going on now and what they're thinking about now, and then you're into a different character, and it's just so well written. I absolutely loved it. On my 5-star reads, I have 2 this month, and one of them is a reread, so it automatically goes in this slot of the order that I talk about things because I want new books to be able to be the best thing that I read in a month. That reread was of Red, White, and Royal Blue. I hadn't read this since the 2 times I read it back in 2019, and it was just time to do it again. I actually hosted this as a read-along over on Pagebound this month, which I just found really, really fun. If you've somehow never heard of this book before, it is a revolutionary romance between the first son of the United States and a Prince of Wales. Obviously there's secrecy involved with something like this. One of the characters actually comes to realize that he's bisexual because he had been very head in the sand about that up until this point. And it's just full of love and banter and hard times and beautiful things, and it's just so good. I will give the slight caveat that if you're you read the first edition, you will have, I think it was 5 different HP references throughout, and it's my understanding that Casey Van Quisten has since removed some, if not all, of those references throughout the text. After the year of 2020, when Joanne decided to reveal the fact that she is the worst. But I always give a pass on that aspect to books that were written before we found out that information. My favorite book this month was a non-fiction book called Out North. This is all about queer life and activism in Canada specifically. I sought this out because I know a bunch about the activism that's happened in the United States because we live in Canada and a lot of our media has historically come from the United States. We learn about things from the United States before we tend to learn about things from Canada, is what it feels like, or at least that's what it was like when I was growing up. So I wanted to search out specifically information about my own country. This is a great resource for that. It's absolutely huge. If I had a coffee table and like had coffee table books, this would be right on there. It's also really fun to flip through because you see all of these different things from the archives, which is an archive of material having to do with queer Canadians. And it's just so interesting to look through all these different old pamphlets or buttons or collections of R-rated VHS tapes. This was just an endlessly fascinating book, and it has a whole list of books at the end of it that kind of informed it, so now I'm going to have to read some of those. I won't be able to find all of them because some of them are very, very niche. So unless I go to the archives by myself and kind of check things out, I'm not going to get to all of these books, but I'm going to try to get to some of them. As for the books that met Requeer All Year prompts, this is what the board looked like. I did something a little bit different for this month, just because it's fun to come up with a prompt that has 4 different usual distinctions to it and read based on those. For North, I read Out North. For South, I read Cantoras. For East, I read Blue Skin Gods. And for West, I read West of West Indian. As for my bingo board from hell, it looks like this. I have another stamp. It's not in a helpful place based on the other stamp that I have, but like, I've still got time. I added 2 more books to the banned books list, which I didn't really need to do because I've already crossed that off, but that's fine. I added Dark Archives to my 40 before 40 list. I finished my 5th reread, so that was Red, White, and Royal Blue, so I now have that marked off. And I added Boys Run the Riot Volume 4 as well as Persepolis to my translated square, so that one is coming along nicely. If you want to hear me talk more about these books, or other books for that matter, the playlist for my weekly entertainment wrap-ups is always linked down below. If you've read any of these, or you now want to read any of these, let me know about it down in the comments below. On the way down to the comments, if you hit that subscribe button, that would be very nice of you. If you don't feel like leaving a comment, but do you want to make sure that I know you were here, just leave me an emoji or a smiley face if you happen to be on your keyboard. Some people have asked if there's a way to financially support this channel, so I set up a Ko-fi account, which is a digital tipping service. The link for that, as always, is down below. You can like and share this as you see fit, and I will see you very soon. Bye!